Welcome to Native Calgarian and Mossy for listening. I'm your host, Michelle Robinson, speaking to you in Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot Confederacy, home of the Nitsitapi, Sutina Dene, and the Yiharhi Nakota. I talk about history, current news, unheard news, book clubs, with special guests to give local or national issues a voice through an urban Satu Dene lens. My life's work will be to honor the voices of my ancestors and next generation with humor, love, and truth. Reconciliation is work, not performance. May we honor all Indigenous voices with that courage. Today is October 6, 2024. Welcome to Native Calgarian. If you enjoy hearing Indigenous content by this Satu Dene woman, my Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. Also, giving a review helps whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel where you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And always remember to share the things you learn to your network. Oki, naganago mekoche chestakom aki, nara daga da dekots nagotine siku saradi. Hello, my name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use they, them pronouns. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11 in Delaney. I am a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is uninvited to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning Many Big Dog Town, which is named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name that has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. Acknowledging proximity to whiteness is important because the darker the skin, the more racism a person experiences in colonial spaces. My late great-grandfather is Milo Bewol from Deline. His daughter, Granny, is now my late his daughter, Alice, is my late granny. My mother and I are Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act and Post status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution. Having a Canadian Indian Act and Post status card is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. That's why it's taken us so many years and court cases in order for us to be able to access it. Indigenous Two-Spirit or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ community and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socioeconomic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. According to the new Quality of Life report for 2024 from the Calgary Foundation, life is harder if you're part of a racialized group. 42% of members of a racialized group do not have timely access to culturally appropriate health and well-being services, and 40% of members of a racialized group cannot find suitable employment, which is up from 31% from last year. I am not a social worker, nor an elder, nor do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous people. I just share my journey as a Dene mom navigating this colonial, misogynistic, racist world in 2024. As a trauma-informed Dene woman who attempted to run, joined harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow for colonial incarceration, a denial of justice, denial of health services, racism, colonial trauma, and the genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples, I have worked to continue reports to advocate for and attempt to work within these systems. Maybe I should say attempt to survive these systems meant to harm me and my community. Think of all this today, and I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for the so-called country named Canada. I hope you see your role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role as a treaty partner in a so-called time of reconciliation. Pride Month should never be 1 month. It's important to understand the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on these lands by Christian outsiders, reinforced now by society. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest. and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so-called time of reconciliation, but they have been very performative. Of course, land acknowledgements must have meaning. Otherwise, you're just creating more harm. So I encourage folks to introduce themselves with an acknowledgement of their ancestors, story of displacement, how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement. So we as Indigenous people know how safe you are to be around. If you won't acknowledge your local Indigenous nations' names, won't say your pronouns, won't say your story of origin, won't acknowledge stolen lands, won't acknowledge imposed economic oppression, or your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around my community, my family, and myself, because we face the most colonial violence based on ignorance or worse, a willful anti-Indigenous biases. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is literally Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses land theft, colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those who call themselves Native Calgarians or whatever town you're from, you show me you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. Jesse Winty's book Unreconciled explains this perfectly, as do many Indigenous authored books. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism, but would be a part of understanding that whole treaty partnership, meaningful reconciliation, and honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. As a former geomatics drafter, I'd be happy to teach you more, but you'll have to pay me. Go to nativecalgarian.com for more. So this year, I thought it was really important to acknowledge the incredible amounts of racism that we've seen for September 30th. As know all my listeners know, September 30th is a National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And so a really important day. I will say, even the well-meaning allies are really they've pushed my boundaries to the point that I'm not sure I feel comfortable literally calling almost anyone an ally. Um, and I'm going to try to break this down a little more for folks who just aren't getting it. I talked about being trauma informed. I know my listeners and my want to be allies are not understanding that. You have to understand that for generations, September is the time of year that the police and the priests would come and take the children. September is not a fun time of year for most Indigenous people and ones on their healing journeys, acknowledging that ugly depression that sets in September. This was something that was ongoing for decades, and it hasn't stopped. I don't think people understand the gravity of this conversation. I can tell you how incredibly disappointed I was with folks who claim to be part of my inner circle, literally texting me on the morning of September 30th. I'm trying to prepare for presentations. Like, I only get paid maybe once time a year, and that's the day. And I'm getting overwhelming amounts of texts and messages. And so, I am definitely reevaluating my boundaries when it comes to people who claim to want to be allies, because the trauma informed part, they don't understand. In one case, clearly, oppression dynamics of man and woman, gendered violence, not understood in any capacity, which shows me not reading the National Inquiry report. And it is just inappropriate, like, as a married woman, it is just inappropriate for some folks to just think that they have access to me. Um, I'm not some kind of little monkey that you can make dance on the day you want to have me dance. And so I'm seriously considering changing my number, and I'm seriously considering who I would even give that to at this point now, because I think that people have pole vaulted over my boundaries. And I'll talk a little more about healthy relationships and boundaries a little further down the line, because between this and the pretend Indianism and the hunters that came after me. It is just so clear to me how people, a form of violence against Indigenous women is this cyber stalking and the way that we are expected to perform for settler gaze. And I think that, if I'm feeling this way in 2024, I can't imagine the bullshit, honestly, that our ancestors have put up with these so-called well-meaning allies. Not to mention the lack of pay, not to mention, the assumption I will do 300 emails and send invoices for what? $100 honorarium or something. Just disappointing all around with what people have expectations of Indigenous people. If you're going to pay people, fucking pay them up front. This whole, you know, whatever 3 month and quarterly cycle crap is unacceptable. Unacceptable for people. Like we're instead of, focusing on reclaiming, instead of a million other things that we could be doing, we're trying to help settlers and they're still mistreating us and misusing us. And worse, one of the things that I have seen very consistently over the last couple of weeks is the denialism of the issues that we're facing. Now, I literally just posted on my Twitter what I said years ago when Calgary was having these anti-racism sessions, and you would hear all of the counselors and the mayor go, "Oh my god, I had no idea." And I was so annoyed because, I mean, at that time, it had been 5 years since the TRC had come out, like, the White Goose Flying Report was supposed to be on their radar. No idea, no clue. Claiming to read the calls to action. I don't know how anyone has the audacity to say they've read the calls to action and then say to me they didn't know that there were missing children and unmarked graves. Long before the TRC, I had shared with people the gravestones that are at, my granny's residential school. Like, it's a huge monument, and it was done pre-TRC, so it has very, I would argue, demeaning language, just not acknowledging the gravity of the policies that killed all of these people, and, I was sharing that long before the TRC even came out, so it is, overwhelmingly harmful to have anybody liking and sharing these things. I unfriended many folks that morning, one being a neighbor of ours that shared this meme that said, "Oh, we want to go back to the old days." And there was this white grandfather with a white grandson. And I was like, on the TRC day, so on the day that our community is sharing so many graphics about Indian residential school, the effects of all the children that died, and somebody has the audacity to share, "Well, I want to go back to the old days, back when those natives were back in those schools, I guess, hey?" So instant unfriend. The fella who thought it was acceptable to be texting me on the morning of instant block. I just can't even believe the unrealistic expectations. Like, okay, let me just put on a settler hat for a second. In what world is it okay for an unmarried single man to be stalking a woman, a married woman? Why? Because I'm willing to give some free time. Like, I give a free podcast. I give a free book club. That should be enough. I give tons of information on all my social medias, all of them. So it is unacceptable to me that settlers think that they have the right to impose into my personal life the way they have been. So yeah, I think that I'm going to have to make some serious changes about how I allow people into my spaces because while I would love to meet random folks for coffee here and there and have meaningful conversations, people do have to understand like that is a lot of time and effort and money and vehicle maintenance and all sorts of things that are taking away from my life and my family. And I struggle with how to balance that because The hope is people will advocate for these 94 calls to action and 231 calls to justice. And when I am told it's ableist to expect that, I don't have time and patience for that. And I'm going to break down why. Ironically, I was just giving a presentation about health, and I talked about being an Indigenous woman in Alberta. My life expectancy is 68. I'm 47. Um, for men, it's 60. So, like, just to give perspective there, like I have 12 years, like 20 or 22 years if I'm lucky. Not to mention the fact that the last Indian hospital closed in 1996, the same year the Indian residential schools did. I graduated high school in 1994. Like, people don't seem to understand how recent all of these issues are, and they've been ongoing since. Every single day a child is apprehended because of racism in this country. There are children that are dying in care with no accountability because the community doesn't demand it as non-Indigenous people. You b you tell me every day you didn't read the TRC. You tell me every day you didn't read the National Inquiry by your simple actions, even when you claim to be an ally. You don't understand what trauma-informed is, so you don't understand it is actually unacceptable to be demanding so much of folks willing to give for free. It's incredible to me. And frankly, it shouldn't be. It should be paid. There should not be this assumption that I want to show up and do things for free. Just as it wasn't fair to our ancestors, it wasn't fair to all of the people before me. It is unbelievable that people don't understand what economic oppression is in this country, imposed poverty by the systems. You all have the opportunity to change it. I think about the National Indigenous Economic Strategy. I've talked about this before. No, I don't hear y'all advocating for that either. So, I'm telling you the stats in Calgary of how shitty it is to be racialized in Calgary. I'm telling you we don't have jobs because of the racist businesses that won't hire us and keep us and give us a fair wage and give us fair benefits. I'm telling you that. And the expectation of fucking dance monkey dance, it is disgusting. So if you are listening, please really think about your actions. Um, Again, there are calls to actions in health. There are calls to justice for health. And to have people who have benefited from stolen land, from white supremacy, from diagnoses I will never get in my lifetime say that it is ableist when I'm going to die prematurely thanks to racism in the healthcare system. It is unacceptable. That is not trauma informed. That is not understanding oppression dynamics at all. And they're not actual allies. They may think they are, but there are some great books out there. I had a good friend tell me that he read the, white fragility book and then read the nice racism book. Like, those are the bare minimums. And those are written by white people for white people. So with the deepest respect, folks, like, I don't understand how you're not getting it, but this is where we're at. And now I need really strong, healthy boundaries because folks don't get it. And that's why I say, like, you should almost not even engage with me if you haven't read those things, if you haven't done the work of anti-racism training, because I'm in a different world, in a different plane of existence than you, where I can die at a drop of a hat by a cop, by a nurse, by a doctor, by an ambulance person. Like, I can be murdered in a second and none of you will do a goddamn thing about it. Just like we're seeing with so many other folks in this world, in Calgary alone. So with the deepest respect, folks, like, that's just part of it. These are the people who think they're helping. Like, honestly, I had messages from Indigenous people so triggered, and this is who I try to put my actual energy towards, is other Indigenous people. Every settler that butts into my DMs, who butts into my texts, you are taking away from other Indigenous people. Indigenous people who contact me, like, I value them. I value every single one of them. And I had so many people triggered. They, just like me, are triggered by paperwork, and I hate it. But there were comments. Sean Carlton was highlighting over and over again so many examples of denialism that was happening from our own damn politicians that you motherfuckers voted for. The Sun, keeping up all of these horrible comments about lying about Native genocide and trying to use Trudeau. Like, the anti-Trudeau sentiment that's happening is one thing, but attaching all natives to it and the TRC, that is just deplorable, deplorable. It was Stephen Harper who issued that goddamn apology and allowed the commission to do their report. This is a nonpartisan issue. This is literally a treaty partnership that was broken for Canadians to be able to exploit the resources here. Like, this is that economic oppression I'm talking about. And honestly, I've seen so many comments and zero so-called allies doing a goddamn thing about it other than Sean Carlton. And I'm just so disappointed in the amount of vitriol that's out there and the lack of it being challenged by folks who claim to be political. It's disgusting. But I can promise you that these comments are absolutely hurting our community. It's unacceptable. And I wish Canadians would see their role in why it is they need to do more, because they're the ones allowing this hate to perpetuate. I also wanted to talk about October 4th Sisters and Spirit Vigils that are national. I am very disappointed that folks still don't know this. This is a national march that happens everywhere across this country. Like, Indigenous families are honoring their missing and murdered, exploited Indigenous family members that day. That day, Valentine's Day, May 5th. Like, these are dates that should be in your calendar that you should know about. And it shouldn't be on the Indigenous community to invite you all out for it. Like, you should all know. You should be inviting your friends and family. But I know we're not there, and that's why I have a hard time saying I have allies on my team, because, like, how is this information not getting out there? How are politicians so emboldened to be having, basically anti-Indigenous events? So, anyway, our vigil that happened that evening, it was really quite amazing. I, of course, want to say thank you first and foremost to our elder, Ruby Eagle Child, for her opening prayers. It really gave an opportunity for Elder Ruth Scalplock to finally share her decades of experience, her what had happened to her when she was trying to help with a women's shelter that is now run by non-Indigenous board members disproportionately and goes against their own bylaws. We've talked about Reclaim Awaton, and yet this was still brand new to so many people, and people claiming that, you know, it's just ego that has the two vigils. It's like, no, man, this organization hurt Indigenous women, and not just hurt them, but then from there, we, like, the violence to take over something that was Indigenous for Indigenous. Like, I don't understand. Maybe it's the ADHD and autism, I don't know, but I will never understand or respect how we had at least 2 women doing decades of work for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, and just so mistreated as if that was acceptable. So, like, of course, we can't be at a vigil where we know the organizers are hurting Indigenous people. Like, that's not even possible. Last year I had a sacred fire, and I I was glad they wanted to do a vigil in the evening so that our family members could gather, and it was lovely, it was wonderful. Marilyn Northpeg, and she disclosed many things about her story, her family members, that I was so honored to hear. Raven from the Moosehide campaign showed up. I got to thank her face to face for that wonderful letter that she wrote to the leader of the, Conservatives in BC saying, "You're not allowed to even wear a moose hide now because of your policies and your belief system against, UNDRIP." I think they call it UNDRIPA in BC. It was incredible to be able to thank her face to face and meet her face to face. I've been talking about the moose hide campaign since 2013. So here it is, 11 years later, I got to meet Raven, and she came, it was wonderful. Um, Cheryl Wood is an advocate that's been riding a motorcycle to raise awareness, and she knows the Red Rum Motorcycle Club, and, for those who might remember, unfortunately, they've had some deaths from this vehicle that came over and went right into them. And I actually found out there while there was 2 publicly said, there was 1 privately said as well. So that was, it was wonderful for her to come, for her to speak, to tell us all what she is doing. And she's a beautiful Indian that, she rides that's black and red. It's gorgeous. Wanna say thank you to Chantel. Chantel brought her songs, her tables, her chairs, sound system, and she did the media release so that people would know we were doing that. We had Melissa from the Reconciliation Action Group. She came over to the house, helped me, put together, bags for folks to give away. So appreciated. We did have an evening of sandwich making, and Josie and I and Darcy and I, so the 3 of us did as much as we could in a small 2 hours, and, then we had the poster making, which was lovely. I got to meet Lindsay and her wonderful child, Eloise. If you've seen that Haida family, that's who that was. I wanna say thank you to Kat and, Iza. The both of them actually helped with volunteering at the event. They helped do the setup. They helped with sandwiches, distribution, the tear down. I wanna say thank you to Albert Wu for his wonderful photos. He always captures our Indigenous events in the best way. God, I wish I had millions of dollars to give everybody for their contributions, and, but that said, we had Skipping Stone. My friend David Lurie and I talk about his organization of Freedom's Path. They donated financially, Cat donated financially. The City of Calgary's social worker, Lemlem, Calgary Marlborough Community Association, they were the ones that helped us with the poster making night and gave us a location for that and the sandwich making. Of course, Lindsay and Eloise had, apples donations, but the most important part about these events, um, it is all about the families. And if the families are being harmed by, nonprofits, by police, by the city, they don't need to have politicians and police at these events this is about healing, healing for those families. So I was really honored to stand with all of the families that have been advocating, been doing this work, trying to heal from this work, be leaders in healing and, and I just wanna send my deepest apologies to anyone else who helped support this event, and I didn't mention, I think that, it was a wonderful event, and we all learned so much from it, so thank you. Yesterday morning, for those who may not remember, just down the street from me is, where unfortunately Nadia was found and she was murdered by an ex-boyfriend who thought it was appropriate to hurt her. So her sister, her family worked really hard at creating Nadia's foundation and they're trying to raise awareness on, intimate partner violence. And they did a wonderful job of that yesterday morning. Unfortunately, we did not get that many folks to come. So we were trying to encourage people to come. And, we had a wonderful presentations of what we've seen. So Rasha is Nadia's sister. And she put together a wonderful presentation explaining a lot of things. And I just, I thought it was really important, this one particular slide, because for those who my listeners for a long time, you may remember me saying this, and I'm just going to restate it. My relationship with Canada as an Indigenous woman is just like a perpetrator and a victim. And all of the healing that I've had to do in the decades of trying to get counseling and talking about intimate partner violence, family violence, child abuse, all of these things. It always comes down to some of the same concepts and such about healthy boundaries and healthy relationships. So she shows this particular slide about the types of stalking and monitoring. And I just want to read this to you because I think it's so important. I'm going to tell you the stories for two. One, my stupid relationship with Canada, and then two, people who actually think they're my friends and how they're like pole vaulting over my boundaries. Repeated emails and social media messages, like constant. That is a constant issue. My own people do it too, but I know that comes from a place of trauma, and I know where that trauma is coming from. It's that colonial trauma that was imposed by Canada. So I don't get as mad. Well, and the opposite. I forgive my own people because I know why they behave that way. But the repeated emails and social media messages, like, this is why I literally say on my website, "I will charge you if you send me too many emails." And social media messages, like, how many people think it's acceptable to inbox me, send me a text, and send me an email saying, "Check your whatever." It's disgusting, and that is time away from my family, my healing, my reclaiming. It's disgusting. Monitoring your movements. You know, don't get me wrong. If I'm saying, I'm going to be at this event, I'm going to be at this event, and I want you to come to them, come to those events. But like those are events. And, you know, I just find it interesting. I have all of this like free time I am willing to give to people, but they still want me to do events just with them away from those other things. And I don't have capacity for things like that. Um, Repeated calls, text, voice messages, kind of the same thing as repeated emails and social media messages, like, that's just unacceptable. Um, Physical following you. Um, I was at the event on October 4th. I actually asked a friend to come and, just can you watch certain people, like, not coming up to me while I'm trying to organize this event? Still did a million times, and I can't understand why other people don't see this is a huge invasion of privacy, Indigenous or not. But I think because I am Indigenous and I'm a woman, people think it's okay because Canada has always mistreated Indigenous women. So it's just another level of it. It's disgusting. Notes left at your home, workplace, or car, unwanted gifts. I get gifts and I've always felt uncomfortable about it for this exact reason. Because once people start giving you gifts, they feel entitled to you. And I don't think that's respectful in any capacity. Um, Hiring a private investigator. I found that really funny, and I laughed out loud because I was like, "Well, that's what the pretend Indian hunters claim to be, were private investigators, even though they weren't hired by anybody. I doubt they were fully licensed, and I doubt they were insured, but that's a real thing, and that has happened to me, and people don't see what's wrong with it. Oh my god. Showing up uninvited at your home, work, or school. You know, So these are the types of stalking and monitoring that Rasha was trying to tell the crowd to watch for, because that's like her sister Nadia was literally stabbed to death and then shot to death from her stalker. And I know that my so-called allies break all of those rules, all of them. And they're supposed to be my so-called allies, let alone Canada, constantly breaking all of these rules. And it's just unacceptable. I don't understand why people don't get this, but here we are. Seek help. You should talk to someone you trust, ask others for help. I've done that a million times. They don't get it. Turn to the police. I actually spoke for half an hour and I talked about how that's the difference between these resources for non-Indigenous people, is that, like, as Indigenous people, we would never turn to the police because we know they'll kill us. Um, we turn for help and social services will take our children. So, it's horrible. Take care of your personal needs and financial security. Canada literally has chosen that financial security is not an option for Indigenous people. And I've told you all that. I can't take care of my personal needs when I know I can be murdered or, killed by the police or the healthcare system in a second. Make a safety plan. That I know a lot of us work on all the time. What is a safety plan for us? And we have to do that. So, she gave some information about that. Principles of supporting victims. Now, I'm telling folks who are listening because y'all claim to be trauma informed, but like I said in my 30-minute speech, it is really clear to me how many people are not trauma informed and how quick they are to blame the victim every single time. That is the difference. So if you really care about supporting somebody, acknowledge that violence. Be clear on the one who perpetrated abuse is the one who is responsible, i.e., don't victim blame. Challenge the victim blaming messaging and the victim has received from others. Honor the victim's resistance to the violence, allowing the victims to judge their own choices. You know, I don't think people understand what that's like. They gave some great, supports and helplines for, seniors abuse because it was really talking about seniors abuse more than anything. And, there was a wonderful presentation by a doctorate, and, she was, from CARA, and she did empowering healthy aging, understanding healthy and unhealthy relationships as we grow older, promoting well-being, and preventing older adult mistreatment. It's so hard because, like, we probably could have had a full day conference, but 2, the other thing was people didn't wanna come, so that was problematic, but, anyway, I really enjoyed it. I really got a kick out of the fact that we're talking about healthy boundaries and entitlement issues because clearly after those 2 days, it was so painful to me how people don't get it, and, we ask for help and they won't come for the heavy lifting, but they'll come for the picture to put on the internet, which is disappointing as always. So I'm going to be working on my healthy boundaries for that. Also understanding like ADHD and autism. They're always talking about healthy boundaries as coping tools, which I find hysterical because you're talking about marginalized folks. Well, when you're under survival mode, under financial oppression, um, it's really hard to be having healthy boundaries. Oh my God. Um, I wanted to bring up, as always, we have our Indigenous Book Club. So that's next week. If you're still interested in joining, just it's a Zoom link and you can come and listen. The Reconciliation Action Group, they meet quite frequently. So if you want to help with actual reconciliation with action, as opposed to just performance of wearing an orange shirt, and giving crappy land acknowledgements, then, like this is real work that needs to be done so that city council doesn't have the audacity to be like, oh my God, I didn't know racism existed. Also proving they don't read the Calgary Foundation's report as well. Speaking of which, they have an event coming up on Tuesday afternoon that I'm really excited. I'm assuming it's about this report that I'm always quoting in our the quality of life report that I'm always quoting. So I'm super excited about it because, I get to see the folks at Calgary Foundation who I truly feel are trying to do the right work. And I know the one fellow there definitely is doing good work there. So I'm very happy to support that. Um, I'm proud that this podcast gives solutions and includes cultural safety training and cultural first aid and all of them to create that safer space for Indigenous people, people of color, those with disabilities, and to us LGBTQ to speak. According to the 2024 Quality of Life Report from the Calgary Foundation, 87% of members of a racialized group have experienced discrimination based on religion, ethnicity, skin color, culture, language, accent, gender, or sexual orientation. I'm a little disappointed because that is, down a percentage from last year, and I just assumed that was gonna go up after all of this Palestinian conversations, but I guess I was wrong. Um, 50% of Calgarians claim to be committed to anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't know where they were on, Friday night, but I know where they weren't for 50% of Calgarians so-called committed. Um, 84% of, um, racialized Calgarians believe in racism from last year, 66% of non-racialized Calgarians. I'm hoping after Tuesday I'll have an updated one for 2024. I want to say thank you to Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fritkin of heretohelp.bc.ca for putting together amazing amount of cultural action tools of what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it. I don't even think my own reconciliation action group has looked at this after some of the things that I had seen from people who claim to want to be members of it. I'm hoping that people will do the work of it. um, like beyond my podcast, there are so many resources out there. As always, I'm going to bring up a little later. There's a toolkit from Calgary Foundation on how to be a better ally. So there is tons of information out there at this point, and if people are worried about it being ableist, there are videos in the here to help.bc.ca. It just shows me you didn't look. Um, it's just unacceptable. There's so much information, so many panel discussions, so many different podcasts on these issues. Internalized racism and lateral violence. Wow, I been experiencing that this weekend again. Again, these are folks who are dealing with trauma. We're talking about all of September being so difficult on Indigenous people, September 30th being very hard on us, and especially with all the stupid hate and denialism from so many folks. And then October 4th can open up wounds for people on their healing journey, which is why I always give those two resources at the end for numbers of people to call. So, of course, they perpetuate lateral and internalized racism against each other. And, I get to have a lot of those bullets thrown at me too. But it's just another form of violence that marginalized folks experience under the structure of racism imposed on these lands. So, like, that's the stuff that people aren't acknowledging. If you need some more resources beyond books, racialequitytools.org has tons of resource files. Um, AFSC.org is American Friends Service Committee. They have do's and don'ts for bystander intervention, and yet nobody did the interventions so many times. If you see or experience racism in Calgary, report it to acttoendracism.ca or text at 587-507-3838. Anyone who follows me, I wish you would watch the anti-racism organizational lead for the city of Calgary give a presentation on YouTube called The Journey of Becoming an Anti-Racism Leader. Like, honestly, that should be the goal of everybody. 50% of Calgarians claim that they're committed to it. I wonder how many have watched that YouTube video. I want to encourage people to follow Stop the Stack YYC. Members of our Black Lives Matter community are absolutely being targeted by the police, by the justice system in general. That's why so many of us think it's an injustice system. We're talking about mothers trying to protect their children from homophobic racism on the International Day to stop that racism. But the Calgary police protected the racists and the hate mongers and charged Black mothers. It's ridiculous. We also had a member of our queer community, a white male, charged that day. And, I can't emphasize enough where it's October 6th. You know, this has been a hard, hard year on the Muslim community. Right now, Palestine and Lebanon are being brought into this war by Israel and the West, and our people, the Western world, just looking the other way for a genocide while perpetuating one here. You cannot claim to be a fucking ally to me if you don't understand this, if you are not fighting and speaking out against this. Watching even lawyers getting police visits for what they're sharing on social media. Like, we are going to see class action lawsuits, but it's a year in. How many thousands of people have been murdered now? And I was talking about Stop the Stack YYC. Please go to Justice for Palestinians because one of their leaders, same thing, just charges being stacked against this poor man, unable to join my simple vigils. It's just wrong what's happening. I obviously want to acknowledge that John Wells was just murdered here in Calgary, and it was on September 30th that that family did a march from the Carriage House Inn where he was murdered all the way to the Calgary police station. And for those who follow me, you know what happened to me at the Red Deer Radisson one Christmas, 2 Christmases ago now. I It's unbelievable that we bring in these new temporary foreign workers, new Canadians, and they're already taught so much hate against us that they call the police, and then we die. Like, there are calls to action for businesses, calls to justice for businesses. I feel like it's going in one ear and out the other. I don't understand why there wasn't a massive campaign writing for all Canadians to the Carriage House Inn, like, how did you allow this to happen on your property? To the Calgary police, how are you so hateful to Indigenous peoples? City council for not saying a word. And of course, we know ACERT will never find any wrongdoing by the Calgary police. They never do. And when they do, Alberta Justice is there to protect the Calgary police. So, there's no justice in this world anymore for Indigenous people. It's a horrible place to want to raise a girl safely. Oh my God. So, Canadians, this is on you. This is your system that you imposed on our people. You are supposed to be treaty partners. You're not. Anyway, Indigenous people have been talking about our issues, sharing our traumas and reports and commissions and public hearings just so it can be regularly disregarded no more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians in their policies and platforms. If they're not recognizing gender equity plus, if they're not recognizing and cutting violence prevention programs and services, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities, know that your vote is directly negatively impacting so many people. Demand that they implement the TRC calls to action, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. 1996, folks, 1996. The multiple reports about child welfare reform, violence prevention, and now 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry. Provincially, we have the 113 pathways to justice. I don't know why y'all aren't holding your blue elected officials on that. The Premier's Council for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, haven't heard a peep from. White Goose Flying Report, I remember having folks who didn't even know what that was. That's the city's own look at the TRC that folks did off the side of their desk for them, that non-Indigenous people keep ignoring. Denying these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in every institution with multiple reports that say the same thing. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. They don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, sexism. They have zero business running. Should be understood by everybody. Parties, local politicians, community organizations, sports clubs, nonprofits, grassroots organizations. Google articles on how non-Indigenous Canadians can become allies because there's tons of it. Again, Calgary Foundation has an ally toolkit that you can work at, try to be better. I've been sharing a lot of stuff from aboriginalalert.ca and Missing Children Society of Canada. When I see people refusing to share those, that shows me that you side on the side of police, which means that you are not helping Indigenous people in the way that we're asking. Um, you could also go to womenshomelessness.ca for a wonderful write up that they had to protect the lives of Indigenous women, girls, and Two Spirit. And I know the city of Calgary responded by taking all the doors off of the bus shelter so we would freeze to death and have amputations. I don't know why everyone thinks that's acceptable, but here we are. We've seen some updated stats from the Alberta government, and they purposely fudged the numbers. We know now that there were much higher rates of death by the drug crisis that they're just trying to hide so that they can claim their recovery model is the way to go. We've had over 10,000 deaths in Calgary alone since 2016. So if you are using substances, I ask that you don't use alone. If you are using a loan, you can contact the National Overdose Response Service at 888-688-NORS, or you can download the Brave, Doors, or Lifeguard apps. I strongly support Freedom's Path Recovery Society.ca. You can donate with them. And I just want to give a shout out to David because he did help donate some money for our elders and our singers and our helpers that we were able to give to some of the speakers and as well as the elders, most important. But Freedom's Path Recovery Society.ca provides free one-on-one addictions counseling, group treatment for recovery, and are queer-friendly and anti-racist. As many of you have heard, I fully support Canada's first US LGBTQ addiction recovery center called stonewallrecovery.ca. If you're experiencing emotional distress after this last month, anything you heard today, call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 855-242-3310. It is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you can also go to hopeforwellness.ca. They have a little text box. If more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two Spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. Again, it is a 24/7 crisis. 60 Scoops Indigenous Society of Alberta, 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta, ssisa.ca. And I just encourage our 60 Scoopers to be registered there so that if they are doing events that you can be a part of that, knowing exactly, being with people that know exactly what you've gone through. The Indian Residential School Survivors and Family Hotline is 866-925-4419. Kids Help Phone 1-800-668-6868. You can also text at 686868. And they have a live chat from 7 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. The Native Youth Crisis Hotline is 877-209-1266. The LGBT Youth Line, they don't include the two, by the way. You can go to youthline.ca. You can text at 647-694-4275. And for non-Indigenous people, you can usually have a functioning 211. You can use the new national 988 number. You can text 988, or you can go to 988.ca for more. For the crisis supports that are for 2S LGBTQ. I'm just so happy for Toronto having this pilot to help with health related crises and wellness checks. I'm hoping that will reduce the amount of deaths. You can go to twospirit.org to find out more about that. For my American listeners, thank you so much. If you are Two Spirit, you can call the Strong Hearts Helpline at 844-7-NATIVE or 844-762-8433. You can go to strongheartshelpline.org for more as well. Here in Canada, it gets better. Canada.org has tons of resources for LGBTQ. Just a warning for QT BIPOC. I've seen some of the orgs listed in Alberta. And let me tell you, not all of them practice anti-racism or have Indigenous education. So you may want to try the MMIW line instead. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation faces it. This is self-care, how I take my power back. I really started this podcast because I didn't hear a representation actually in mainstream media at all, and I felt that I could maybe help people with their, anti-racism training, their Indigenous education. And sometimes, like, I hear really great feedback at a vigil from some folks who listen, but don't feel like they can post about it. So I do appreciate those kind comments for sure when I see you and when we're first meeting each other. But I also started this podcast because so many people interrupt Indigenous women as we speak. They tone police us. We've had leadership shaming people for having their opinions, and there's a lot of deep rooted stuff there that I don't talk about. But it's the oppression dynamics, that lateral violence that has happened as a result of the Indian Act. I don't even talk about it. Um, Gaslighting questions. So many people just don't want to hear our opinions, but sure like to tell us theirs, even if they know nothing about, our constant surveillance that we constantly are under from the society, businesses, police, and the government in general. We are surveilled at our protests, our vigils, and our rights are constantly taken away. And yet Canadians don't do anything about it. I and many others share information on microaggressions daily, so it's just unacceptable anymore. Again, read white privilege, read nice racism, read from Black authors, read from other Indigenous authors, and for those who think it's ableist, there are audiobooks of so much of this. Like, there really isn't an excuse. Be trauma informed. The idea that there is an expectation of a person with disability, a person of color, a person who identifies as LGBTQ, the expectation of an Indigenous woman to pet your ego and make you feel so good shows me you are not trauma informed. Being trauma informed means that you understand when you see people lash out. You understand that there are probably good reasons for it. You understand that there's trauma being triggered all over the place, especially by Canadians who think it's acceptable to deny what happened at Indian residential schools. Folks like me are dealing with internalized racism, gatekeepers, folks who survive off the status quo, and folks who are so in their trauma that they're sending me all the emails, all of the tags on social media, and they're so in their trauma that I don't have time to do other work. They deplete my personal resources. Internal and external racism is an everyday reality for me, other Indigenous folks, folks with disabilities, QT BIPOC, and other groups. I want to say thank you, though, to my ancestors. Thank you to my granny, my mom, what strength looks like through your example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family. I want to say thank you to my husband. He produces and edits the show, but on top of that, he's my husband, my childhood friend. He's the father of my child, and he has supported my journey down the red road and witnessed decades of racism and sexism. To our child, Thunder Pipe Necklace Woman, we are so blessed to learn from you daily and honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. I can't believe how miles ahead you are on this conversation of ADHD and autism. I'm so honored to be your mother. I hope one day my family will be proud of me trying to discuss these present day issues. I honor the Blackfoot. The elders and the members have been so kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot. Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce it in Satu Dene, as did another resource I stumbled upon. I also want to give a shout out to one of my young Métis friends who found a ridiculous amount of paperwork of my family lineage after this pretend Indian hunting incident. You know, my humblest apologies to elders, language keepers, as I learn proper pronunciation on these languages. My native, Calgarian Patreon account is where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. Just fun fact, I didn't get enough donations for this event, but I'll tell you, all of the donations that I've been lucky enough to receive over the course of the year, like, that's where that money went. I did some presentations, and that's where that money went so that we could pay our speakers and do that, type of work. And just pay our elders as they should be. I wish I had millions of dollars to give them actually, because it's a lot for that they have given, especially, Josie Nippenak, now the Native Women of Canada's, I don't know if she's the executive director or the president, I'm pretty sure it's the chair. She and Ruth Scalplock doing this work for decades. I'm so honored to know you both and be mentored by you both, and, um, honored to stand with you on October 4th. So for folks who donate, know that this is where that money goes. I would love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. I also have a YouTube channel. You can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. The last thing I wanna do is a touch grass moment. There are a lot of dark things I talk about and I see on social media, but I'll tell you, I'm really lucky and blessed to have good people in my life. I was lucky enough to meet, folks from Fort McMurray Pride and was gifted the cutest Grogu beaded earrings ever. So I know I'm lucky and honored to be here and to be talking about these things. Quite frankly, what my mom, what my granny, what my family, Indigenous family has gone through is freaking nothing compared or freaking everything. What I go through is nothing. So I feel it's a blessing to be able to talk about these things, and I'm honored that anybody listens to the end. So thank you so much, folks, for always listening. And I want to give side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not Tradish. And my beautiful cousin would respond, "Or you'd be in my dish." Thanks, folks, for listening.